Hey, I'm Jillian, welcoming you back to your favorite education podcast. This week's episode is called Undermined and Overrepresented, Female Educators in the U.S. We will be talking about exactly that, female teachers. We'll be tracking these teachers from the mid to late 1800s all the way up to the present day, talking about how and why they entered the classroom, the view of female educators, and what exactly was expected of them. As we follow this timeline, we will have a special guest pop in to share some of her own opinions and experiences with us, but we won't meet her quite yet. We'll end our time together with a discussion of the number of female educators and how, despite incontrovertible challenges that female teachers have faced, they also hold a sort of monopoly on the teaching force. Stay tuned as we jump into Undermined and Overrepresented, Female Educators. Before we dive into the good stuff, it's time for a quick history lesson. Public education has existed in the United States for hundreds of years, but over time it has definitely become more standardized and regulated. Especially after the American Revolution, education was a hot-button issue for a lot of folks. That debate in itself is a whole nother episode, so we're just going to jump forward a few decades to the mid-1800s. As Americans moved west, settling on the frontier in tiny, remote towns, the need for teachers drastically increased. Up until that point, educators in traditional classroom settings had been almost entirely male, but now there simply weren't enough men willing to move out to the frontier and teach. According to the documentary School, the Story of American Public Education, this was a huge opportunity for women. Throngs of unmarried young women moved out west, creating a shift in the demographics of teachers that would drastically alter education moving forward. Alright, now let's jump forward another few decades to the late 1800s. During and after the Civil War, the need for more teachers rose again. As discussed in an 1875 volume of the New England Journal of Education, women found more opportunities in the classroom as men were called away to war. Even after the war, women held on to these positions, one author claims because they were more effective at managing a class. Women continued to teach young children through the rest of the 19th century all the way up to the present day. In higher education, such as secondary school or university, the appearance of female educators was less common, although some women made names for themselves, like Flora Rose and Martha Van Rensselaer, two professors of home economics at Cornell University in the beginning of the 20th century. We'll get more into the appearance, or lack thereof, of women in higher education in just a bit. However, it is essential to recognize that this brief overview of female teachers centers on white women. School was formally segregated until the 1950s, and most data collection was about white classes. That is not to say that there were no black female educators. Black women overwhelmingly taught in black schools from the post-Civil War era up until the desegregation of schools in the 1950s, when an estimated 30,000 black teachers lost their jobs, according to a journal publication by Veronica Shipp. So, given the quick history lesson I just threw at you, it's easy to see why white female educators have dominated the teaching force for decades. Before we get too much further, I'd like to introduce our special guest for this episode. Please welcome Katie Townsend, an elementary school teacher from Lyman, Maine. She also happens to be my aunt, so as excited as I am sure she is to be here, she also doesn't really have a choice. Aunt Katie, could you tell us where you work and what you do?
I work at Lyman Elementary School, and I'm a second grade teacher.
That's right. So you currently teach second grade, but you've taught some other grades in past years, haven't you?
I have. I have taught kindergarten, first grade, third grade, and I've also been a literacy specialist.
All right, wonderful. So we are just going to dive right in, and Aunt Katie will chime in every now and again to add to our conversation. So we already know how women entered the teaching profession, but the next question is why? For many women, this was one of the only, if not the only, option for a woman who did not want to be a homemaker. Of course, this position could be quite isolating as a single woman, but many still jumped on the opportunity for a more independent lifestyle. That then begs the question, why was society on board with this? Women entering the workforce was a pretty drastic shift in typical gender roles, so why was the mostly male professional world okay with this? The simple answer? It was cheaper. This appears over and over again. The school documentary, the New England Journal of Education, and former Harvard University president Charles Eliot all cite lower cost as one of the driving forces behind the increase in female teachers. And this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. The U.S. Japan's Women's Journal mentions how when compulsory education in Japan was lengthened from 4 to 6 years in the early 1900s, bureaucrats agreed in part because they could hire female teachers to lessen the financial load. Back in the U.S., an 1869 article in the Maine State Journal of Education got specific. The average salary of a female teacher in Maine for an 18-week period was $54.52 in total. But inflation, you say, and yes, I concede $54 in 1869 is not $54 in 2021, but do you know how much it actually is today? $1,108 for roughly a semester of teaching. But how much were the men making, you say? Honestly, I don't know. But the article makes it quite clear that female teachers were paid considerably less than male teachers. In fact, the article says that, quote, in many towns, the wages paid to female teachers is less than that paid to servant girls in the kitchen, end quote. Sound familiar, Aunt Katie?
I think of ed techs. So ed techs in general, so they're there to help the teachers or whatever they need to do. They're paid less than minimum wage.
Oh my goodness.
So, yes. So, I mean, we have ed techs that make $10 an hour. I mean, you can work at McDonald's for more than that.
Sound familiar? If female teachers in Maine are to ed techs what servant girls are to food service workers, catch my drift? This underpayment of teachers also manifests itself today in a less clearly gendered way. A study by Richard Ingersoll finds that salaries for teachers have essentially flatlined since the 1990s, but expensive educational requirements like master's degrees continue to be added to a pre-service teacher's checklist. However, the financial benefits of hiring women do not fully explain why society accepted female teachers as easily as it did. The truth of the matter is that teaching is a profession that fits nicely into the traditional gender norms and division of labor. Educating children seems to be merely an extension of raising them, which made women appear well-suited for the job, especially in the lower grades. This justification of women as natural teachers has been around just as long as the financial justification. Catherine Stowe, proponent of female educators on the frontier, argued that women are, quote, fitted by habit and disposition and circumstance for such duties, end quote. Even Charles Eliot, who complained about the number of men displaced by female teachers, said that, quote, all children under 10 years of age may be advantageously taught by well-educated women of taste and vigor, end quote. Somehow that still doesn't feel like a compliment, but nevertheless, this logic made women popular choices for classroom teachers, especially with younger children. And although it is great that women were allowed into the professional world, is it a setback that they were only allowed to do so because said profession adhered to the limiting gender roles in place? I would say yes, if only because the equating of female teachers with child raisers has not gone anywhere. Aunt Katie, any thoughts on this perception of female teachers as being responsible for raising their students? I know you mentioned in our conversations earlier that you feel like some families view school as more of a place to raise their children than educate them.
Yeah, kids come to school with no coat or, all kinds of things, and of course I go find them a code, or I was cleaning out here the other day and found, Zach and Ryan's old stuff. I said, I'm going to take that to school.
Yeah, and this view of female teachers as de facto mothers can also make it challenging for men who are interested in becoming teachers. If we assume that women make such good teachers because children are drawn to women by a, quote, natural instinct, according to one of the writers in the New England Journal of Education, then where does that leave male teachers? Nowhere, that writer would say. Actually, he would say, quote, man is powerless in the nursery or primary school, end quote. And he did say that. So how do women handle the assumption that they are naturally drawn to raising children, not just educating them? Well, according to Hirano Fumiko, author of Record of a Woman Teacher, you play into it. Fumiko wrote that she would refer to her students as her chicks, or call herself their mother, as a way to gain power over how she ran her classroom. An analysis of Record of a Woman Teacher by Endo Mika speculates that Fumiko knew exactly what she was doing. Quote, as maternal embodiments of care, they, female teachers, could gain the leverage to carry out the significant change that they deemed necessary, end quote. This sounds familiar too, right? In the same way that women played into gender stereotypes to get into the classroom, they also played into them to gain leverage in classrooms. I'll let you think on that while we take a short break. When we come back, we'll crunch some numbers and see just how many teachers are women. Alright, welcome back. You know, we've been having such a wonderful discussion about the causes and effects of having so many female teachers. I realized we never really talked about how many female teachers there actually are. I will be using numbers from a 2015 study from Richard Ingersoll as listed in an article from The Atlantic. First off, in 2015, over 3/4 of teachers were women. However, that is an average, and the breakdown looks a little different depending on grade level. Only 6 out of 10 high school teachers are women, while 9 out of 10 elementary school teachers are women. Katie, what does that look like at your school?
At my school now, there are no classroom teachers that are male teachers. We have the gym teacher and the art teacher and then a literacy specialist. But otherwise, there are no male classroom teachers.
And people have thoughts about this, obviously. In fact, one of the journals I keep referring to, the New England Journal of Education, is chock full of responses to this very discussion. In particular, they are responses to a speech by our old friend, Harvard University President Charles Eliot. He has similar thoughts to everyone else as to why so many teachers are women, they're cheaper, and they're naturally maternal. But President Eliot was not too happy about the number of female educators, saying that all the new female educators entering the profession were causing a high teacher turnover rate that was detrimental to the students. Besides this being generally wrong, as female teachers often stayed the entire year, while male teachers often taught only one semester of the year to fund their research, causing turnover in the middle of the school year, it also seems like Eliot is blaming women for the fact that there are more attractive candidates because they're underpaid. There seems to be an easy solution here, something along the lines of paying women more, but if I had to guess, I don't think dear President Eliot would be a fan of that. He kinda seems like a jerk. But we're getting off track. Back to the demographics of teachers. If the teaching force is dominated by women, it makes sense that the administration would look the same, right? Wrong. According to our old pal Ingersoll, almost half of all principals are men. Yes, you say, we're so close to women being proportionately represented in all levels of administration. Actually, not really. While women may make up more than half of all principals, they only make up 1/3 of high school principals, and only 1/4 of district superintendents. So if these women aren't administrating high schools and districts, then where are they? Ah, yes. The elementary schools. Raise your hand if you're surprised. Since I can't see you, I'm going to assume you didn't raise your hand. Unfortunately, that debacle needs to go on the back burner for now. Maybe our next episode can be about female administrators, but we are on a mission. We have to talk about female teachers. As we have seen, female teachers have been historically underpaid, doubted, and overworked. They don't have proportional representation at the management level, and they overall kick butt without getting nearly enough credit. So yes, female teachers are undermined. But the A+ listeners in the room remember that our title has 2 parts, Undermined and Overrepresented. We'll take a short break while you ponder what exactly the problem is with having so many female teachers. So what is the problem with having so many female teachers? I think it's easy to get caught up in the historical struggle that women have in the workplace and as a result see such a large representation of women as a good thing. But what if it were reversed? What if 3/4 of all teachers were men? Wouldn't we be complaining about the lack of women? This comparison holds true for just about any identity. If most teachers are white, middle to upper class, able-bodied, cis women, shouldn't we be advocating for more teachers of color, more teachers of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, more disabled teachers, more trans and non-binary teachers, and more male teachers? Yes. So that's our goal, a diverse teaching staff. But why? Nobody's going to be the jerk that advocates against diversity, but why are we advocating for it? Why is it important for teachers to represent all sorts of identities, backgrounds, and communities? Aunt Katie has a very simple answer.
A positive role model.
I couldn't agree more, Aunt Katie. Children need to see something of themselves in the adults around them, especially as they begin to form opinions about what's possible for themselves. Rudine Sims Bishop sums it up perfectly for me in her article, Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. The concept is simple. Children need to be exposed to diverse literature, in Bishop's case, for a few reasons. For some children, that story will act as a mirror, a way to see themselves. It will expand upon what they believe about themselves and what they can do. For other students, it will be a window, a small peek into what it's like to be someone else. It builds empathy and encourages understanding. And for some students, it's a sliding glass door. It's a way to step into and interact with a certain identity, to connect with a part of themselves they're unfamiliar with or don't know much about. Teachers are the same way. A diverse teaching staff acts as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors for students. All right, Jillian, you say, this is great. Love the metaphor. Totally agree. But now what? How do we fix it? And truly, I don't know. But let's walk ourselves through the problem, shall we? Maybe we'll come up with some ideas. Teachers, especially female teachers, need more respect, better compensation, and a better understanding of what they actually do in a classroom. To me, that sounds like teachers need a higher social status, like a doctor has. Everyone knows what a doctor does, and doctors are fairly compensated and well respected. So, if we need to raise the social status of teachers, how do we do that? Our old pal Ingersoll has an idea. Pay teachers more. That seems backwards since it's one of the results we're looking for, but sometimes the simplest solution's the best one, right? In a society where salary and prestige seem to go hand in hand, increasing the salary seems like an effective way to increase the prestige. We can fake it till we make it. Alright, well, there's one idea, and maybe that will also help with the public understanding of what teachers do and giving them the resources they need to do so. But what about diversity? It's a big deal too. I mean, if we want more diverse teachers, the answer seems simple. Hire more diverse teachers. Of course, that's a bit easier said than done. In a society that has repeatedly put white women as the pinnacle of educators, many of our pre-service teachers are just that, myself included. Aunt Katie, any thoughts on why it can be difficult to find, say, more male teachers?
Maybe males have not been talked to about it and say, hey, have you ever thought of this? You're really great with kids. Have you thought about doing this? I don't think they're pushed in that direction or, given that thought of trying that out.
So then really it starts with us. And I don't mean us like me and you specifically, but us as a society. If we want more diverse teachers, we need to start seeing more people as possible teachers. Let's break the cycle from within, y'all. And raise salaries, obviously. All right, so we've got our marching orders. Aunt Katie, as we wrap up, any words of wisdom? What makes this all worth it? Why do we do it?
Having a connection with all the kids and getting to know them as a person and also a student. I remember once I walked into a restaurant down in Biddeford, and this girl said to me, "Oh my gosh, are you Miss Cross?" And I'm like, "Yes." She was my first class.
I was going to say Miss Cross.
My first, second grade class.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, right? It would have been 1996, 95, 96. So it's just crazy. So it's just things like that. So that's what makes it, all this other stuff, make it worthwhile.
Lasting personal connections. You heard it here first, folks. And with those words of wisdom, I send you on your way. Thanks for tuning in to Undermined and Overrepresented, Female Educators in the U.S. See you next week.